And we are not only live, but we are recording. So hello, anybody who is hanging out with us. All right. This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by Skull Splitter Dice. Head to skullsplitterdice.com/Tome Show to get a 15% off coupon. It's also supported by listeners like you. Thanks for using the Tome's Amazon and DM's Guild affiliate links, and for being patrons over at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome, a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Jeff Greiner. And in this episode, without Tracy, number 330, we're going to stop a plague demon as we review the Demonplague. Joining us for this episode is the Tome Show's social media manager, waking up from his frozen prison, Ishmael Alvarez. Welcome back.
Hello. How's it going? How's it going?
Lovely on this end. And also on board with us, writing a comment across the internet to bring havoc to us all, is Jonathan Green.
Hey, how's it going?
Fantabulous. It's good to have everybody here from all over the world. We are an international cast tonight of reviewers from at least 3 different time zones. That's impressive, right?
I mean, we all managed to get on at the same time. That's always my success. If I could do that at work, my life would be much easier.
Navigating 3 different time zones, one of which is far removed. You know, what are you? How many time zones away are you?
Eastern time is just 5 hours.
5 hours from me, 6 from Ishmael.
7 from Ishmael. You'll be mountain time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right on.
I am.
Okay, so this is an adventure. The Demonplague is an adventure written by John Four and friend of the show, James Intercasso. Before James worked on what appears to be just about every book Wizards of the Coast published. He wrote this level 1 to 20 adventure alongside John as part of a Kickstarter project. It collects 4 adventures into a full campaign across a setting known as the Luna Valley. James also streamed a playthrough of the campaign and has a podcast version of that stream coming out to this day, produced by another good friend of the show, Rudy Basso. So, before we get too far into that, I want to make sure we mention our sponsor, Skull Splitter Dice. If you head to skullsplitterdice.com/Tome Show, you will find a coupon code that will give you 15% off with this sponsorship. Oh, no. That will give you 15% off, and they'll know that you came from us. I think this is going to be the last episode I record for this sponsorship, but I have to say I've really enjoyed having Skull Splitter Dice be a sponsor. They have not been the first dice company who's sponsored us, so it would be really easy to be a bit blah about them, but I just can't do it. Their dice are really cool, and while I don't need more dice or dice accessories or what have you, I keep going back and checking out the store. I've already bought things from them twice, and I've got another couple of things in a cart already, getting ready to make it a third purchase because I keep finding cool stuff. Whether it's dice that I bought from my own game group, dice that I got for myself, and now I discovered that they have this really cool dice container that's in the shape of like a necromantic skull made up of the face. It's a skull made up of the faces of like ghosts and stuff. So that seems really cool, and I might have to pick that up since I'm about to head to Ravenloft. It seems ideal to have my dice sitting on the table in a giant skull, you know. So anyway, I guess you could say I am not just a spokesman, but I am a fan of Skull Splitter Dice. You can check them out at skullsplitterdice.com/Tome Show, and I promise you will find something that you want. All right. So we are back, and it's on to the review. But first up, I believe at least one of us is working from a review copy. So in full disclosure, who is that?
That is me. I am working from a review copy.
That's awesome. So, and I don't, Jonathan, did you purchase it after the fact, or did you kickstart it?
I was a Kickstarter backer. Yes, I've been on board since the very beginning.
That's how I got my copy as well, as I kickstarted it. So now we know where everybody's coming from. So let's start off with the hard question, easy question. I don't know. What's the adventure about? Who wants to tackle that?
I'll jump in on that one. So the adventure starts off after this nice Arctic tundra has been melted by a giant comet, and as everything starts getting melted, old civilizations and ruins start getting uncovered, including something called the Demonplague, which turns humanoids into vicious undead monsters. It is not curable by divine magic, and it starts slowly spreading. And it's up to the players to find out the cause and stop the disease before the plague spreads across the entire world.
Yeah, that's a good sort of summary in general, right? And so you've got this like glacier-like valley. It's an old valley. There was very like the backstory on this is intentionally, I think, cyclical, right? Because it starts off with these elves that lived there that had escaped sort of the destruction that was being wrought on their home by this plague demon known as Zancrown. And so they escape. They end up in this place that ends up being called the Luna Valley. Zancrown follows them there. They manage to trap the demon into this sort of dungeon using a powerful ritual and what have you. And then, but the Star Elf sort of empire dies off in the destruction from Zancrown, right? And then 1,000 years later, the dwarves move in, and they, as dwarves do, dug too deep. They end up, right? They end up waking Zancrown and wreaking their own sort of destruction in the process, and then the Zancrown sort of goes back to sleep again. Then the human is it then the human empire? No, then it's the green.
No, then the goblins.
Yeah.
No, then the goblins.
Yeah. Which was an interesting choice, by the way. That they sometimes in the book refer to goblins and sometimes refer to greenskins.
Yeah. Whenever I heard greenskins, I always assumed that was kind of the slightly racist term that the residents of the valley used to describe it. But there's a lot of ways to look at it. It's. Go ahead.
No. Sorry. You go first.
I mean, essentially, it's goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears, the traditional goblinoid races. Although a slightly winter version of them because it is all Arctic and frozen up there. So a slight variation of traditional goblins, still the same. Those big three goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears that all kind of work together.
Right.
Well, I was just gonna add too. At first, I thought maybe they mean like a conglomerate of goblinoids and orcs, but then I remembered orcs are only green in World of Warcraft.
Well, now that was part of my thinking too. Is that there's some effort to make the adventure it's not setting neutral, but it's sort of its own little self-contained setting that can then be planted into whatever world you want it to be. And it occurred to me that maybe they were referencing orcs more or less, but recognize that orcs don't exist in all settings. Like Kobold Press's Midgard don't have orcs, right? But they do have the Trollkin. So maybe they used sort of this term instead, so you could swap out whatever. But then it becomes. And it's fairly ambiguous through most of the adventure, but then you get to the end, not to skip to the end, but you're dealing with these four factions inside the dungeon representing these four different eras of fighting against the Zancrown. And the one that is the Greenskins is populated by goblins and goblinoids. So it makes it pretty clear that greenskins equals goblins. At which point then it's just a strange term to use for them, and I wasn't sure what was going on. So the good news.
No, that totally makes sense.
The good news is that when we're dealing with this adventure, if we have a lot of questions, I know somebody we can talk to about it and get some answers, hopefully. So I can't guarantee it. I haven't actually talked to him about it yet, but I figure there's a decent chance we could get James to come on and do an interview for this as well. So we'll see what happens with that. So in any case, I was giving more background, right? Then the greenskins come in. The same sort of thing happens to them. That was 1,000 years after the dwarves, and then 1,000 years after the greenskins come in, the human empire called the Raytheon Empire comes in, and they also awaken Zan Crown. Because apparently that's what you do every 1,000 years. A new group is there ruling the area, and you wake up the plague demon underneath your feet. And so they wake up the plague demon, but they had a group of druids that figured out how to modify the original Star Elf ritual to try to re-trap Zan Crown. And so they trapped him back in his dungeon, but also dropped a glacier on the entire valley, so it's even harder to get now to the dungeon to wake him up, right? And that's what happens for 1,000 years again. Yeah. And such is life in the Luna Valley until now. It's the current time, and a comet has landed, and the comet is melting the glacier and waking up Zan Crown for the 4th time. Well, he was already awake the first time, right?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. Fifth time is here.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that's sort of the backstory. And so the players are there. The glacier is melting. All of the towns that existed in the Luna Valley have been destroyed by the glacier melting and the rapid change in the environment. And so all these refugees have gone to the one last town that exists, Tomar's Crossing, that happens to be on a hill in the middle of the valley. And that's where the players sort of take over, right?
Yeah, and they did a really good job of making it the kind of place that you would want to keep on going back to. It seems like there's a lot to do there, and like a good town should be there. There are endearing NPCs that would make you want to fight for them not to be obliterated.
Honestly, I think the town of Tomar's Crossing, it might be the strongest point of the entire adventure. The number of NPCs that are there, the amount of political intrigue that's available if players want to get involved, what you can do with the various survivors. So if your players want to really go in, let's try and save what scraps of civilization that we can and get food and things like that. Or they might say, okay, that was a nice little adventuring town when we were level 2. We don't care anymore, and they can leave it. It gives a lot of options. And in my group, it's been one of the kind of one of the stellar bits of the campaign. Is
so you've actually been running it?
Actually, finished session number 23 about 3 hours ago. We just finished.
So how far into the adventure are you?
My player's just at level 8. So we did the adventures kind of broken into 4 parts: 1 through 5, 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 11 through 15, and then through the end. 1 through 5, we stayed pretty close to the book, but now we've gone pretty far off the path that's been there. It's been there. More and more of the custom stuff that I added to my players' backgrounds and things like that has started coming up. So at this point, what they should be doing is frantically searching for all the ritual pieces to try and reseal Zan Crown. And they have not done any of that. They're running around up in the town of Safe Harbor trying to fight a giant undead kraken.
Okay,
so, good times.
You've added your own little elements. Although, go ahead.
The Kraken was in one of the bonus things that was included for the Kickstarter. But I've added in a lot of my own personal stuff. Just to tie into like you should do with any published take what's there, add in your own stuff, add in your own stuff more relevant to players.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Have you been? Did you watch the stream, or have you been listening to the podcast version of the stream?
I've been listening to the podcast. And I'm just about caught up with where it currently is, which is way through the adventure.
They just hit a point that I think is the finale, maybe, of the second part. So it's been interesting. I have been listening to the podcasted version from the moment it came out, but I hadn't read it. Like I kickstarted it, I had it, I downloaded it, but I, just as an issue of time, I hadn't gotten around to reading it yet. And then I started reading it and I'm discovering how much of it, like how James, who's DMing it for the podcast and stream, how much of it he's sticking to and how much of it he's modifying to match his players, even as the writer of the adventure, right? I was curious sort of how he would play it all and how he would run it and what would be modified and what would be the same and what have you. So it's been interesting to watch how much he's able to put into it. And man, the video will not keep Ishmael at a normal size. I keep adjusting it every time it shrinks you or makes you giant, but we'll see. I don't know what's going on. So Ishmael, were you about to say something?
No, just about the size of my video. I don't know why it's been like flopping in and out.
It did the same thing when we did a stream with Mike for Behind the DM Screen last month. So I think it might be a weird thing that happens with whatever the software is that we're using. So one of the pieces doesn't like to play well with the other, I think. I don't know. I'll just keep an eye on it. So if you see me looking to the side at the screen, that's what I'm dealing with is fixing your size.
Okay.
So anyway, yeah. So the first part. So it's broken down into 4 parts, I guess. Let's just break down, or not even. We don't have to go through point by point, but let's briefly sort of talk about what each part is sort of about, right? What they're doing. So part 1 largely deals with this trek to Fort Frostfell. It starts with a trek to Fort Frostfell.
Right. Part 1 is largely about trying to find food for the refugees and tracking down a bunch of refugees who keep on getting kidnapped by bandits, by other people, figuring out who's starting to take all these people. And a lot more just focused on survival. Like the idea of getting food and things for the town is a major quest point. But also tracking down people who have been kidnapped. And then by the end of it, you kind of get a vague idea that there's something bigger going on. So that's up through level 5. Part 2 is, essentially it's a bunch of fetch quest type things. You're gathering components for a ritual. So going around to, so there's some dungeons, there's some, there's cults involved, like every good adventure should have. And then part 3 is designed to be a bit of a hex crawl. So it's going back around trying to track down something called Comet Demon, who is the one responsible for the melt, tracking down places to perform the ritual. And then the final part, which is 1620, is going into the dungeon of the Xancran. It's into the mega dungeon.
So it kind of was very clearly intended to hit multiple sort of typical forms of adventure in the different parts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to add too, it just seems like it's very interesting the way that it was all set up, where it was almost like a melting glacier where you started getting into different, not only different parts of the adventure, but like different parts of the history of how it happened as you go from part to part.
Yeah.
Like you're really revealing more layers.
Yeah, no, and you sort of pick up more and more as you go on, and a lot of what you're dealing with, I like how different things layer in sort of that history and that lore. Like when they go to Fort Frostfell, that was an old fort from a knightly order, and the current incarnation of that knightly order is in Tomar's Crossing with the refugees and potentially causing problems or not, depending on what's going on in your campaign, right? And then similarly, you go through from there, and you eventually work your way to the barrows of the Star Elves, or one of the barrows of the Star Elves, where you find the big bad of part 1, who is this necromancer Relikai, who it turns out for the big bad is really trying to help, kind of, right?
Yeah, has a very good reason for doing what he's doing and can be reasoned with. which I know happened in James's podcast, and that happened in mine as well. My group sat down, they just sat down. They had a long conversation. So one session was basically negotiation with the villain, where exchanging information. Like, okay, what if we do this and this? Yeah, it was just a giant. Let's parlay, which worked out really well. And a little bit of disappointment when they realized they weren't going to get to throw down and have a big old fight. But overall, they were happy. But overall, they were happy.
Yeah, I was curious how that would work and how satisfying that is as an ending, right? When you're building up this adventure and you're expecting a big throwdown with the big bad villain that you've been hunting this whole time, and then you just sort of talk him down.
That's happened to me. So many times where players have. They've been so willing to negotiate with whoever the big bad is, even if it's just some mid-boss or whatever. And usually then I'll be like, oh, and then some demons just throw something at them so that they can not only feel like they get a satisfactory fight, but then also so that they get to fight with the guy or the person they're negotiating with, and that just the lines. You can only do that so many times before they start to cry foul.
Sure, I can imagine. So did you, Jonathan? When you ran it, was it more or less straight? Like they negotiated with it and they were kind of let down by it, and you let it go, or how did you handle that?
Overall, they were pretty happy. When my players were making backgrounds, I kind of told them just the vague, basically just starting. Like, here's how it starts out. Here's how it's going to go. Here's where it's going to go. And one of my players said, "Hey, I've got an idea. We can use that one unique thing idea from 13th Age." And his was when everything started to melt. I was actually and I got thawed out from civilization long ago, and I just woke up. Which is almost the exact same thing that Relica. He's got that same thing. So I was able to tie their backstories together pretty closely. And so while he's the most kind of gung-ho, let's go punch people, it ended up being a really character development moment where he got to talk to somebody who actually knew his past, who he used to be. So that worked out really well for me, but I getting a little bit more frustrated. But for the most part, they were happy that they had the option to talk him down, even though they were ready for a fight. It ended up being a lot of backstory, a lot of development, and one of those negotiations with someone who, on the one hand, he kidnaps children and does weird magical experiments on them. On the other, I think we just lost Ishmael.
We'll continue on. Hopefully he'll joining.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So on the one hand, Relica is a villain who kidnaps people and does magical experiments on them and kills them and will turn them into undead monsters. However, he's doing it to stop a plague in the world. His kind of argument is you have to make some sacrifices to save everyone else. Okay, I'll buy that. You're a little bit crazy and weird, but overall your end goal is something that we can compromise on and agree that this is a goal worthwhile. We'll just get you to stop, kidnapping innocent people for your experiments.
And he and especially at that point, like the adventure is designed in such a way that Relikai is really kind of open to that. Like, it describes that, he's kind of reached the end of the usefulness of that part of his experimentation. And so it's really easy to, we want you to stop kidnapping people. And he's like, yeah, well, I wasn't really getting anything out of that anyway, so that's fine,
But it's still a weird undead, necromancer. So if your party's just they want to fight a good villain, can easily become just cackling maniacal skeletor type as well.
He kind of reminds me of Negan from Walking Dead, where he's definitely a bad guy, but there's an element where you could, as a player, maybe convince yourself like we maybe need this guy because he knows things we don't, or he has something that's going to help us make it through. And even if we have to like keep him in a cage and feed him blood every so often, like that's the sacrifice we have to make to try and save the world.
Right. Well, and it's working with Relikai is even more. There's more incentive for that even than there is for the Alexandrians to work with Negan in The Walking Dead, right? Because you can understand Negan, and Negan can be useful, but ultimately Negan has different goals than you. Like, Negan wants his people to survive, and he wants you to more or less be enslaved to make that happen, right? Whereas Ralakai, like, he kind of wants to save you. He might have to kill some of you to do it, but mostly he wants to save you, right? So you actually have pretty aligned goals. It's just that he's an evil necromancer. I'm curious how crazy you made him, too, because there was a line in there in his description about how he doesn't even realize he's been frozen, right? He still thinks it's 1,000 years ago, and that none of this has happened yet, or none of the frozen bits or the new stuff has happened. So,
yeah. I mean, I'm with him as slightly mad German scientist. Which again, I got to have fun with, and the players they role played well. They had some good dice rolls in it. Worked out pretty well, about as well as it could have. But I mean, you can definitely play him up as this boy's crazy, and so it really is able to kind of suit to your campaign. While we're kind of talking about villains, the other thing that's happening in the background is there's Homer's Crossing, and when you first kind of read the adventures, why so many NPCs in this town, all of them with their own plot and their own thing. But whenever you actually sit down and play, it works out very well. There's the village council elections, which players want to get involved with, if they can, and if they don't, they don't care, they don't. But all the various members of the council, they've all. I mean, this is the most treacherous town I've ever seen. Like, everyone's kind of got their own motivation. Everyone has they're spying on one another. They're getting blackmailed, etc. So the current kind of village master, as the game starts, is this guy named Jalen, and he's probably the best villain ever running. If it came down to a straight fight, any of my players, they could just wipe the floor with him. But he's smart. He learns from his mistakes. And he does kind of want what's best for the town. He just wants to make sure that he's also in charge while that's happening. So he'll compromise. Go and do this. He's building supplies. That's great for the town. But if you cross him, then things start getting really ugly. So I've enjoyed it just because it's gotten to let me play a very intelligent villain who has a lot of resources available, but physically, like I said, if it ever came to, he can't ever directly confront any NPC because even the wizard will beat him in a fist fight. Like he's just kind of he's a pushover,
but he's a well-connected customer with blackmail material and other NPCs.
Sure. So I've had a blast. With him to the point where I'm changing a lot of stuff in the later chapters to make sure that he stays relevant. And the town of Homer's Crossing is relevant because my players, both in my game and also what I saw in James's game, really latched onto a lot of those NPCs and developed relationships with them and wanted to pursue what was going on.
You know what I noticed when I compare the adventure as written to the way James ran it is that the adventure as written has a quite lengthy list of potential NPCs that could be running for the town council. But he didn't highlight all of those people. He kind of picked out the ones that seemed the most relevant to the storylines that the players were interested in and left all the others out. And I think that's a smart way to do it. Like, there's a lot of NPCs to pull from, but you don't have to use all of those NPCs, right? You can just bring in the ones that make the story work.
The list of potential NPCs in that first chapter. And
did we lose Jonathan again?
Uh-oh. I thought I lost connection, but it looks like he's frozen or something. Am I still changing size?
It seems to have stabilized for the time being, but I don't want to jinx it.
Okay.
So let's see if we're going to get Jonathan back or not. I would apologize to the stream, but I don't know that we have more than maybe one person watching. So,
I was going to add in
Go
a
ahead.
little bit. I'll see 10 minutes back. But just it seems like the town really ended up being the connective tissue, not just between the parts, but also just between the adventures. No, I mean, with some very big exceptions, people just aren't in the mood to do mega dungeons as much anymore. But if you break up a mega dungeon with you go to town and you socialize, and that kind of makes it a lot more so desirable. I saw that as being like the big so I saw that town could always be a thing to go back to, not just to resupply, not just to break up the monotony, but to kind of infuse the game with a lot more social interaction than you would if you were say playing some other mega dungeon that didn't have factions in it, that didn't have a lot of agreeable NPCs and so on.
Jonathan, are you back?
Oh, this one.
Jonathan left and then came back, and now he looks like he's frozen again.
Oh no.
So anyway, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's an appeal to Tomar's Crossing in that way, right? A well-written mega dungeon doesn't just have the place to go back and resupply and rest. It has a place to go back that you care about and is impacted by what's going on, right? There was an element of that in Princes of the Apocalypse as well, I thought, where... Oh. Right?
Oh. Yeah.
Okay.
Don't worry, that's normal for me.
I thought Princes of the Apocalypse did that fairly well too. Like, you were on a relatively small island, and so when the cult, sort of got out of hand, as it was wont to do while you were playing through the mega dungeon, it would react, and the reactions from the cult in the mega dungeon would spill out into the town, and things would get destroyed, and all that kind of stuff would happen. So I felt like Tomar's Crossing sort of provided an actually smaller, more concise version of that, because it wasn't the whole area and multiple little small towns, but it was like one town where everybody's at because of the melt, and that you care about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right about that. It wasn't just like this is a place we go and we kind of decompress. There are things in the adventure and in the dungeon and various places where I guess if you trigger those events or you discover new things, then it either will make things happen in the town or it will make you want to investigate things.
I actually rather liked the way it was written in such a way that it would describe, if you go and talk to this NPC in the town in part one, right? And even a little bit in part two, there's this, if you go talk to this person and you talk to them first, here's why you might do that, and here's the kind of task they might give you, right? And it was, but it was subtle enough that it changes, or nuanced enough that it changes depending on who you go and talk to in what order. Right. If you've already sort of started siding with one person, it may affect how other people sort of react to what you're doing and what the tasks are that you're completing.
Yeah, and it doesn't ability that you would see in say Ravenloft,
right?
But even just thinking about the contemporaneous games that are being played, you see all of the interesting little intricacies of things that change or the way that things go. So you might play through once, but then if you, let's say you watch a podcast or a live play of it, you would be interested enough to know that it's not going to be exactly the same. You want to see what different little things the players did, what choices they may have made. So it seems a lot less railroady in that aspect. There's paths to take, and not everyone's going to take the same path.
Yeah, absolutely. Part of me wonders, because I know James, who wrote a lot of this, and I know that James worked on a lot of other things, including things like Dragon Heist, right? I'm looking at some of the ways that the NPCs were handled here and wondering if some of those weren't things that were being tested out that would then turn into like the faction missions in Dragon Heist and that kind of stuff, right? I felt some overlap there, and that overlap may be coincidental, right? I don't know that it had anything to do with each other. It may be a coincidence that it overlapped there, because that is not a form of adventure that's new, all right? People have done that kind of thing before. Oh, we had Jonathan for a moment. Now we get a different frozen image of Jonathan on the stream. So,
but no, I totally agree. It seemed like there was definitely a concerted effort to kind of pull over some. It was like a dry run, if you will, and you see a lot of those same kinds of things, highlighting the intrigue over the social interaction a little bit, trying to make it like, well, these are just people to talk to. Like you're going to want to talk to them, and if you don't, they might be up to some stuff of their own that you'll then to kind of react to, whether it's to help them or to work against them.
It's not the same kind of intrigue that you get in Dragon Heist, right? But you definitely get like this political element to it, even in a small, like, as much as you're going to run into politics in a relatively small village, right? Or a small city, or whatever however you want to describe Tomorrow's Crossing. It feels like, when I hear James describe it in his podcast, it feels small to me. But at the same time, it's got refugees from like multiple cities that have all converged here. So it must be bigger than exists in my head, right? But there we are. So that's more or less part one, and then part two. Remind me what part two is about. I'm pulling it up here on my iPad.
Yeah, same here.
So part two is running. Part two is the collect the MacGuffin part of the adventure, right? Levels 6 through 10, where the ghosts of the druids who cast the ritual that created the glacier show up and say, "Hey, we could do this again and re-trap Zancrown, but we need you to run around to the now exposed ruins all over the valley in order to get us the components we need to complete this ritual." And it feels like, when it's first described, that this is going to be a bit of a slog, because there's like a bunch of components. But then it turns out that you kind of and first you have to not only get the components, but you have to go and find the other ghosts to figure out what the components are. But then you realize that you go to one location, it usually has an opportunity to find multiples of the components. Most of the components aren't unique. It's just, like, for example, one of them is just a magic item, right? Or what is it, a magic weapon maybe? And so that's not unique, right? You can make that work regardless of where you're at. You don't have to go on a special quest to get a magic weapon or a magic item in this adventure. And so that's doable, right? And then the few that are unique, you can oftentimes collect them in the same location that you talk to one of the druid ghosts, and possibly even find some of the other more unique components that you need. Like those mushrooms are growing in like 2 of the 3 locations that you go to. So hey, Jonathan's back.
Hey, yeah, sorry, the Wi-Fi went out. Yeah, sorry, the Wi-Fi went out, and I don't know why. I just had to go and boot up the other computer.
Well,
so I just had to go and boot up the other
glad
computer.
to have you back.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, welcome back. No worries.
About that, guys.
Yeah, welcome back. I was just going to say really quick. Kind of the setup of this adventure. Adventure reminded me of all of the discussion that was happening about when that book came out, and kind of the lamentation of the fact that so much of the book you would only use a chunk of it in one place, and it seemed like this was almost like a reaction. Almost like a reaction to that, where you could go to multiple locations. You wouldn't have to use all of them. But you would have reasons to go from one to the other. And you could get many of them at one. You expand it to other locations. But you could kind of like read the table and decide how you wanted to go about it. How much of that you wanted to pursue.
This is in chasing down all part 2. In part 2. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was praising part one earlier. Parts 2 and 3, I think things are so much looser that my plan is for a lot of I'm going to take the stuff that I like, and I'm also going to stick in my own dungeons, and stick in some of my own components. If you're the kind of GM who wants a rough guideline and put in a lot of your own stuff and custom stuff, that's I think where this campaign can really shine, because especially in part 3 really light.
And part 3 is very intended to be the sandbox hex crawl part of the dungeon, right?
Yeah, that's the point where all of your own personal custom stuff. And you can also do that. You can also do that 2 as well. But part 2 is very much a. You can find the stuff here. You can find the stuff there. You can find it there. If players miss one of them, it's okay. It's okay.
Although you do kind of it mostly details 3 locations, and you kind of have to get to all of them as written because that's where the druid ghosts are, right? You need to interact with these druid ghosts to figure out what you need, but also you're going to need them later to actually do the ritual. So so you have to visit each of the 3 at least once, but it's also only 3. That's not a very big ask.
You would think that. I gotta go yell at my players some more.
Go ahead. What are you gonna say?
I was going to say so at the end of part 1, you get to talk to Fairy the Wise, and who will kind of lay out here's what happened, here's why we dropped a glacier on the place. Some of my more stick in the mud, super good players, like, what, you just dropped a glacier on everybody? You just dropped a glacier on everybody? Clearly, we don't care about your opinion. We don't care about your opinion. Bad choice. You're dumb and you make we're not going to listen to you. We're not going to listen to you. We're going to go up there and see what's going on. We're going to go up there and see what's going on in this town. Maybe we'll come back and help you out with your dumb ritual. Like it. If you like it.
Well, I suppose you could do it that way.
So I mean, and that's going to come back and bite them. And that's going to come back and bite them as worse and worse. This is a very good adventure. This is a very good adventure. Use kind of a ticking clock. Because you can just start. Because you can just start showing up. More and more Valak showing up. If they've really gotten attached to either Tomar's Crossing or any of the other villages, or if any of the other villages, or set up a settlement, which I know a lot of groups have done. You can just start throwing Valak at those. You can just start throwing Valak at those. They'll realize quickly. We can't ignore this.
Well, and it's a ticking clock that you've got your hand on the dial for. It's not kind of thing where you're kind of thing where it forces your hand. You can play with it a little bit.
It's not Tomb of Annihilation, which specifically says this many hit points per day, sort of thing, right? You can sort of, remind them that there's danger. Throw a Valak attack at Frostfell or Tomar's Crossing every now and then, just to remind them, hey, people are dying. People you care about are dying while you're running around not dealing with this, right? And maybe you don't like Fairy Eye's solution, and there's good reason not to like Fairy Eye's solution. But what's your alternative, right? Just let it go. That doesn't seem like a good choice. So you run all over the place. You find all these various components, and then is this the one that ends with the attack on Tomar's Crossing? Okay.
Yes.
So at the end, after they've collected the components,
pretty aggressive demon attack.
It's sort of multiple waves. It's described as multiple waves of demons leading up to a big fight, and it feels like it was put in there like that for the reason of like you said, like without a ticking clock, right? It still adds some pressure. Like, no, don't forget this is dangerous, but it also gives you sort of the big conclusionary climactic fight at the end of the section that you maybe missed with Ralakai, right?
Yeah. And luckily, I mean, with demons, it's not a let's talk. They're going to try and kill. They're going to try and kill everything. So that's definitely let's throw down. No, let's throw down.
Yeah.
And I really like the way that they laid out too. Just having triggers This is when you can introduce the next wave. This is a good idea for how the following wave comes in a way that's dramatic, but necessarily overwhelming. I think there was a lot of thought put into how that was going to work. Because I've seen that implemented in other adventures, and it just seems kind of like, okay, here's a wave of demons. And when they're done with that, just throw the next one at them, and so forth.
And I've seen that kind of thing done before as well. But oftentimes you don't see that kind of forethought in a relatively small adventure written by a couple people, right? John, were you going to say something?
I'll come back to it later.
Okay.
When we've got some broader thoughts. We've got some
now, and I felt like it was interesting. John, you said you're not quite current on the podcast, right?
No, I think I'm an episode or two behind. So they're just finishing it. I think they just finished it. I think they just finished the House of Chaos.
Have you been listening to the podcast?
I have not actually. Did not realize that there was a podcast. So I'm going to have to start listening to it.
So the last episode that just came out as we're recording this, that I just listened to earlier today, was the demon attack, right? And while we're praising sort of the way James and John set up the waves to trigger at certain moments, so that it wasn't just one's done and then another one comes later and whatever. James didn't run it that way at all. Basically, there was a warning, like, oh my gosh, watch out, the demons are coming, right? And somebody noticed them, and they all freaked out. And rather than, like, set up the defense of the town, the characters just sort of led the entire town in fleeing to the nearby fort and hiding out in there, and then led the fight from there. So I don't know at this point what James is going to do in terms of, like, does that mean that a bunch of the town has been destroyed as the demons sort of ran through? That might be what I did. But in any case, as a result, they just sat back behind the walls and were shooting arrows at the demons for a while, and then very clearly and specifically targeted the big bad demon that they saw in the distance, which was a Merilith, right? And so they just target the Merilith. Like, clearly this is the problem. And so they just target the Merilith to the point that James just sort of skips over all the waves, lets them kill some things along the way, but they want to zoom in on the Merilith. He lets them just sort of zoom in on the Merilith and jump straight to that fight. And there were really no waves. So it was it's again interesting to see how he's modifying and changing the way he does his own adventure.
And it does seem to kind of have that spirit like do it the way you would want to do it, because that's exactly like the spirit of this. It's like, here's some really good guidelines, but also you can throw them out the window and do it your own way.
Well, and you're right. It is very clearly set up to acknowledge and deal with that, because when you see it even back with even before you get to Ralakai, right? There's what was it, I forget the name of it, the second sort of little mini dungeon between Frostfell and the Star Elf Barrows.
Yeah, the dwarf place. Yeah, the dwarf place.
Yeah, something like that. So you run into the bandit faction that's there working for Ralakai, and you realize, and there's an opportunity to realize actually there's dissent within the faction, and you can choose to fight all of the bandits and do it that way, or you can choose to team up with the bandit who's looking to overthrow the current leader, and set up a new leader who's maybe more friendly to you, and then you get to Ralakai and you can take him out, or you can sort of team up with him, and so yeah, I think there's a lot of acknowledgement. They don't leave it just completely open-ended, which is actually nice. Like I don't. If I wanted it completely open-ended where I just made all the choices, I don't need an adventure, right? I'm just making it up on my own at that point. But they recognize the most likely options. They lay out, like, here are the different paths that are possible, and here's sort of how to adjudicate that if that's the direction that your players decide to go. And I thought that was well done. And it kind of ties into part 3, as we're about to talk about part 3. Because part 3 is, and I think the part 3 and part 4 will actually be a little bit faster to talk about, because they're mostly just doing one thing, right? So part 3 is the Hex Crawl, where you're exploring the Luna Valley and you're looking for different things. Mostly, well, and I guess what you're looking for completely depends on what it is that you've decided you want to do, or at least what the players want to do, right? They're given 4 different options in terms of how they want to solve the problem, right? All of which involve this ritual, which is good because they just spent the entire last 5 levels hunting down the components for the ritual, right? So I suppose they should do something with it, but they can either use the ritual to bring down another glacier and re-trap Zancrown. They can use the ritual to create a second dungeon and trap this comet demon who's come to free Zancrown, right? They can use it to kill Zancrown, and I forget what the 4th option was. Do you guys remember?
You can use it to make a cure for the plague, but it's more of a limited cure. So hey, we can cure everybody in the valley and make them immune to it. But basically you have to keep on recasting the ritual to keep getting more
It's really a Band-Aid, not a solution.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what they all seem to be is either a Band-Aid solution or just kicking the problem down the line, which is complete D&D adventure. Like that's what they would totally do. Just like, okay, can't deal with this. Let's let the people in the thousand.
Oh, see, I was thinking the opposite. Like, it seems to me that at least in most of the games that I've run, a lot of big epic, world-ending problems are the result of people in the past who've kicked the can down the road, and now the players are finally going to deal with it.
Right.
They're finally going to do it the right way. And and if we're being honest, this adventure is set up to do that, right? They lay out in part 3, they lay out like, here are 4 equally possible options that they could go with. But if you do that, then you don't need part 4, because part 4 assumes you're going into the dungeon and you're going to kill Zancrown. So if you chose one of the other options, that's the end of the campaign. We don't need part 4. So yeah, and the cure one especially is not very effective, right? Because we can. What is it? Every casting you get like 100 doses of the cure. Yeah, but how good is that? How helpful is that going to be? A month or 2 down the road when every other person in the valley is a Veloc, right?
That's definitely one of your PCs has been infected with the Demonplague. Here's a way around it.
This is a potential.
Yeah, that's my assumption. or some NPCs that you really care about. Yeah.
That's a good point. So the assumption is they're going to go after Zancrown. But in order to do that, you have to find where the Demonplague dungeon is. Where is Zancrown hidden? It's been buried under a glacier for 1,000 years, and it was lost, to the destruction of the dwarves for several thousand years before that, right? And so it becomes a big hex crawl. Run all over the place. Along the way, hopefully, you can find the comet and deal with some of the demons there. But the big bad comet demon that brought the comet there isn't there, because it has found the entrance to Zancrown's dungeon. Which is very clearly designed to be set up so that the comet demon can be the big bad fight to conclude this part of the adventure, right?
Right.
And so it becomes a hex crawl. You run around, you're rolling random dice, you're seeing what you run into, you're seeing whether or not you find the things you're looking for, and eventually, by random determination, hey, you found it.
Yeah, I think part 3 is definitely the weakest part. Partially because it is just a if you run it as written, it is. Eventually, hope the dice roll out in your favor, otherwise it could drag on for a while. And most GMs will just kind of make that according to their own timing. But in my opinion, hex crawls work best at lower levels because at this point, if someone's doing a hex crawl when they're level 14 or something like that, Scrying can find out exactly where you need to go and then go there. Why? And we'll fly there or teleport. There's no reason to crawl hex by hex.
Worst case scenario, we can get 4 or 5 hexes done per day just by flying over it.
Yeah.
and not getting the things that are there.
Yeah. And like, so I enjoyed good hex crawl. That was my favorite. One of my favorite parts of Tomb of Annihilation. We had a great time doing a hex crawl through a jungle. But that's levels 1 through 5. Whereas this, I'm again, this is me speaking theory because I'm not to that part. But I'm a lot more. That's probably a lot more of an area that I'm going to change once we kind of hit that.
And there's not a lot of story happening in this whole section, right? It's mostly 5 levels of hunt around and see what you see, and there's some stuff going on that you might deal with, and there's some story encounters that you throw in there. But the real thrust of this whole section is you should go find the entrance, right? There's not a lot of beats.
Yeah. It gets you to the. This one it felt a little more like padding, or hey, we need to make this a 1 to 20 adventure. What are we going to do for levels 10 to 15?
And go ahead. Sorry, I was just going to say it's an odd because really X-Crawl is its own thing. It's a mechanic that kind of takes the center stage. Now we like to think of if you're going to do a 1 to 20 adventure, there's a really good chance someone might start this as their first experience with Dungeons and Dragons or what have you. And to introduce a hex crawl, more than halfway through this adventure just seems like an odd thing. Like either start with a hex crawl and introduce that as a mechanic and so on, or maybe do it like a little ways in, like not like this far in. It almost seems like a huge tonal shift for being far into the adventure.
And also odds are they've got a decent amount of the valley already mapped out.
Yeah, I guess part of the idea here is that if you've mapped out the valley before this, you may have missed large chunks because there was still melting going on, right? A lot of it was still buried, and you didn't find the ruins weren't exposed, and so that part actually I think is a strength of that because it highlights that passage of time is existing and the melt is still happening. So I enjoyed that. I actually thought that was okay. The parts and I'm not generally a huge fan of hex crawls, and I think there's a couple of ways you can do these kinds of things. I actually prefer the way Tomb of Annihilation did it, where the thing you're looking for is in a specific location. And there are multiple things you might encounter on your way to exploring to eventually find it. You don't know what that location is. There are some possible clues you might run into along the way, and that is more fun to me. It tells a better story to me. You can control the narrative in more meaningful ways that way. Whereas the random location bit, every time they explore a hex, roll a dice and figure out if that's where the thing is that they're looking for, right? That becomes weird. Like, there's one of the options where they're casting the ritual to re-bring the glacier in. You have to go around the perimeter of the entire valley, which could take months of travel, just rolling random encounters, and occasionally, like, what is it, a 5% chance that one of them is going to have one of these nodes that you need to cast at. That sounds like a real slog. And that randomness to it could mean that you go, like, suddenly there's 3 nodes right next to each other, and then you don't run into another one for like 500 miles, and that's weird. And I could see that whole thing coming off a little bit strange. I would just rather they be on the map and we know where they are, and the players have to figure out where they are. But even that, you're right. I think at this level, it's weird to do that anyway.
Yeah. I mean, my vague thought right now is probably so. Part 4 is the big exam dungeon where you're actually going in after him, and even though it's a mega dungeon, there are factions there that you can try to play off each other. And each faction is representative of one of the fallen civilizations. So you can have a lot of fun with that. I'm probably going to take that more as part 3. I'll level everything down a little bit, and levels 12 to 17 or something like that will be going through the Zam dungeon, and then make my high tier like level 18, 19, 20 epic level stuff. Okay, you killed a Zam crown. There's a lot of plague demons. Why don't you go kill all of them? This will never happen again. And then go crazy extra planar into the abyss. Do level 20 character stuff. But still kind of keep in theme of as you kill one Xan crown, you see a mural on the wall showing thousands of Xan crown eggs. That one of those type things.
Yeah.
I like that a lot till I get here. So that's kind of my expectation. I might do a little bit of the hex crawl. I'm not going to do 5 levels of it.
And the story bits that are there are interesting. Like dealing with the giant war is cool. Finding the entrance is cool. What the raid on Tomar's Crossing. I'm looking through the chapter right now. Saving Fairy Eye. All of those things are interesting and necessary. I just don't. I sort of want to. I think you could run those story encounters, pick a set location for where the plague dungeon is, the Demonplague dungeon is, right, and then just run it without the exploration piece, because like you've said, at this high a level, it seems like a bit of a moot point anyway. That said, I kind of wish they had done the hex crawl earlier, because they loaded in a ton of really cool things on how to run a hex crawl. It just needed to be at level 5 to 10,
Yeah, so maybe switching part 2 and part 3 might have worked a bit better.
And maybe that's maybe you could introduce the hex crawl bit from part 3 into part 2 in order to find all those components they need for the ritual. That might work fairly well.
Yeah.
So anyway, I feel like there's good things here, and there's good reason to critique a little bit as well. One of the things that James actually said when I asked him for review copies for a few of the folks working on this was he responded with, "Oh yeah, great! I will definitely send those out. Be warned, I've learned a lot since then." Like he was hedging a little bit, That's more or less chapter 3, right? Or part 3 is this hex crawl running around and all that. And then part 4 is relatively similar, I think, in terms of scope and what we need to talk about. It's just a mega dungeon. You found the Xan Crown's dungeon, and you have to work your way through it until you eventually find Xan Crown and defeat him in combat, and then have the druids cast the ritual so he stays dead. Right, that's more or less how it all works out. Now, like all good mega dungeons, and we've had episodes where we talked about mega dungeons before, so I think this plays out here as well. Like all good mega dungeons, there is and should be like interesting factions and things going on inside the dungeon, and you have that here. You have factions that represent the 4 different empires that have been destroyed by Xan Crown before. You've got the elves, you've got the dwarves, you've got the greenskins. And / goblins, and you've got the humans, right? And then you've actually have the chance for new people that have been captured or sucked in or whatever in this most recent event, which I thought was a neat little addition, because there's even this little sidebar of when you run into one of these people, there's a chance it's actually an NPC that they've met, right? And introduce, and I don't think I would even leave it to chance. I think they list it as a 5% chance. Every time you encounter one, there's a 5% chance it's somebody they know. I think I would just say, no. What this one's somebody they know, right? I would just decide, because that's more interesting.
Oh yeah. And I'm currently exceeding that already. Like, I know I'm 10 levels ahead at least before the whole happen, but I've already got some NPCs. Like, yep, you're going in. You're going in. Oh man, they'll hate to rent you. So you're definitely going to be there.
Well, and the factions are interesting, and because you get a little bit more of the lore and the history of the setting of this this whole threat, because you sort of see the 4 different layers of civilizations that have been destroyed, right? At the same time, it's interesting because none of them are still what they were, right? There's something about the magic of the dungeon that transforms them all into, was it either demons or undead?
So you got one faction that's a bunch of mummies, one that's all vampires.
The elves are like wraiths and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, right? They've been warped by the dungeon. They're clearly part of and under the control a bit of the dungeon, but they're still kind of their own thing too, right? And they're still competing with each other, but they're also all still guarding Crown. It's a little bit weird that they're competing with each other, but also all have the exact same goal.
Yeah, and once you've got to get the generic MacGuffins from them. Then once you do, you can go and fight Zane Crown. Which, as far as like a overall adventure Captain boss, that's a tough monster. He's got some really fun.
Yeah, well, and it's a good thing that it's a tough and interesting monster, because the actual encounter is pretty bland. Like, there's no environmental effects, there's no strange fantastic things going on in the room. All that I think could have been spiced up a lot more, because if you just read through the room descriptions and you get to the bit with Zan Crown, it comes off a little anticlimactic to me. It's like, and then there he is, and you fight him, and the end. Oh, okay.
But no, definitely. I could see where James might have been like, I would have done this different had I done it. But that's kind of the curse of writing. You finish what you have, and then you learn, and then you wish you could have gone back and done it differently, but then...
Right.
But I mean, I don't know if that's where he's coming from.
I think no good project is ever done, right? It's just turned in. Yeah.
No, exactly. That you hit the nail on it.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say.
So yeah, and I also noticed that like they get to a point where they're trying to throw in almost every iconic sort of magic item that you could possibly pick up, if not here or then earlier. Like there's a Vorpal sword and a Mace of Disruption, and I think it's only missing a Wand of Wonder and a Staff of the Magi.
That the most valuable thing in the entire campaign is that Mace of Disruption, which you get like level 3, and smart PCs will never throw that away, because that versus undead and fiends, that'll take you the entire game.
And I think there's another one in part 4 in the dungeon. I think there was another one laced in there too, so they could actually pick up 2 Maces of Disruption over the. I think there's an Oath Bow. There's all kinds. Oh my! It's like every possible. But at that point, you're almost at the end anyway. So anything we wanted to say sort of about the story at this point?
I know I've said it before, but definitely the strongest part of this adventure is part 1 and Tomorrow's Crossing and the NPCs they meet. One thing I would say it is, it'll definitely take some effort to make sure those NPCs in that town stays relevant kind of throughout the rest of the campaign, and make them want to keep on going back, keep on caring about them. So one thing that I'm looking at is as you hear more about the Blood War, if this really is a demon plague, and the demons are going to spread out across the Valley and across whichever campaign world they're in, that means there's going to be a bunch of devils who are like, hey, we need to get involved here.
Yeah, there's a whole other storyline you could throw in, right?
Really, yeah. And if you've got people like Jalen who's still running Tomorrow's Crossing, you want to talk about somebody who will make a pact with the devil to stay in power. So I'm throwing some of that stuff in. The entire city of Safe Harbor, there's like a little bit of additional bonus content where it's got some information there. But you've got this was a pretty large metropolis city that is more or less ruined in chaos with an undead kraken in it. There's a lot of potential there. So there's a lot of areas where you can still. One of the other things that this adventure does well, it leaves a lot of room to add in stuff to really make this shine and make it tailored to your PCs. So I definitely encourage people to do that.
And I mean, everything here is done really well with the idea of modularity. You could very easily substitute another demon lord in here. There's the frost giant demon lord name I have a really hard time pronouncing. Yeah, that's the one. He could very easily be the one in here, and so on. And it's really cool for someone who just wants to be able to bring whatever their story is here, and just kind of personalize it. It's probably something I would do if I were to run a campaign, which I'm eager to do at some point when my plate is a little bit cleared. But they really do a good job of, because it's a valley, because it's been covered with ice, you could literally throw it anywhere. anywhere. Just say, nobody has been here. Now the ice is melting. So just that kind of self-contained nature of it makes it really cool to play with because it literally could be anywhere. And it's all feasible. It's not like a comet fell and all of these things that weren't there before now are. It makes a lot of sense.
There's also a you see a bit especially as you're wandering the valley of a bunch of giants keep on fighting each other and lots of skirmishes between frost giants and fire giants. So if you were like me, you ran Storm King's Thunder and you still have all this giant stuff that you never actually got to use, this is a great place to start putting a lot of that back in. And I've even seen some people on the Facebook group who have talked about combining Storm Thunder and the Demonplague and kind of running both in tandem. You know, Jeff Grinder style, where you mash campaigns and like shove it all together and make easy deals with both of them. So this is definitely a campaign with that could work very well.
One more thing that I was going to add is that I like the idea that like different planes and different worlds are probably seeded with these like contained demon lords, and that's where all of them are, because there are you know probably hundreds of demon lords just given the randomness and the proliferation of the abyss. It's like where are all of them? They're probably like sealed away on some world just waiting.
Well, and they seem to have gone out of their way. Like they've introduced not only Zancrown as this previously undescribed demon lord, as well as the Comet Demon, which I'm assuming is also a demon lord and not just some sort of lower level, pit fiend sort of level creature. But they introduced them as comet demons and plague demons as if that is a whole type of demon, except that it doesn't exist anywhere else in lore that I've ever heard of, right?
Yeah, right. And go ahead. I'm sorry. You first.
Like I mentioned earlier, my the actual level is this is a plague demon. There's a lot more, and one plague demon can wipe out an entire civilization. So that being applicable in Cap version, I'm going to do is go destroy all of them because you cannot let even one of these things survive.
Ishmael, you were going to say?
And I was just going to say that the infinite nature of the abyss means that there's infinite types of demons that no one's ever heard of. I like what is it? Descent into Avernus, where they even make it where the demons under a particular demon lord take on the physical appearance of their demon lord. And so you could imagine just the demons as a faction are so unfocused and so all over the place that even just having two demon lords coming after you to make the devils end up notice. And so you could just have like all of these random demon lords no one's ever heard of stuck in some out of the way planar corner, and then all of a sudden something wakes them up, and you've got another thing to worry about.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, and honestly, I think as much whether it's adding in all these extra storylines of the devils coming in, or other demon lords getting involved, bringing the blood war into it, or it's mashing it up with Storm King's Thunder or whatever. One of the things I noticed was the adventure is sort of set up in a way that assumes milestone leveling, which is fine with me because that's my preferred way of leveling up games anyway. But it also occurs to me that, like, in theory, that means I think you're leveling up really fast. It seems to me that it's in terms of campaigns, it's a 1 to 20 campaign, but it's a pretty short 1 to 20 campaign.
You regularly every week. You could probably knock this out in a year. You could probably knock this out if you really push. If you really push.
It seems like it's just longer than it would be if it were like a Shadow of the Demon Lord campaign. where it's meant to be kind of like done very quickly and very quickly and in succession. So yeah, you could probably do it. So yeah, you could probably do it within the stretch of a year. But I think I like that about it. But I think I like that, especially if you were to condense some of the parts, go all the way to level 20, go all the way to within the scope of it. Within the scope of it, more natural that way. More natural that way. Like just kind of take out the chunks, kind of take out the chunks that you didn't want, part 3 that you and maybe finish it like 16 or 17, and then either decide if you're going to continue the super epic like the super epic or stuff, just cut it there, and it feels like a complete story.
All right. Any last thoughts? Because we have ended up going well over an hour, and if I add in an interview with James at this point, it's going to be a really long episode. So.
I can sit here and toss out ideas. No one wants to add in, but no one wants to hear my side ideas.
That would be great. We should. I've talked off and on for a little while of doing like a behind the DM screen like the B team. So I'd love, that's a great place to put in your ideas. But this is not a review of John's ideas, right?
Yeah.
Great. So if Ishmael, did you have any last thoughts?
Just a couple of things about the actual product itself. Reminds me a lot of a Raging Swan product, which is high praise. If anybody knows about Raging Swan. Just clean, well delivered, great art, awesome layout. I really love the way that all of the content was delivered, especially like the random counter tables. I didn't talk about that too much earlier. And how it seemed like everything was appropriate. You were fighting like things that were appropriate to your level, and things that were kind of interesting within just the random tables. It made me excited to roll on them, which random encounters don't usually do. And the side quests that were thrown in also were really neat and seemed like it was kind of like adding some potatoes to it. I think that's all that I have to say. Yeah.
Sorry, one last thing. One thing that I really like is there's a NPC codex, which is just for every major NPC in the game. It's a one-page sheet. It's got the portrait. And it's kind of got, hey, here's just quick rundown on the NPC, some of their goals, some of their secrets, or just as a GM to glance at, okay, I know what this is, and then a big spot for writing in your own notes, and making your own, and adding whatever details you need to. And that's really handy to run because I've just got that stack. When I get to that NPC, I can pull it out, remind players what they look like, and I can quickly remind myself, all right, here's what this NPC deal is, instead of going back through this 200 page PDF. So it's really handy to think that.
And there was Ishmael. Did you end up getting that as well? I don't know what came with just the Kickstarter or what came with the adventure as a whole.
It came with quite a few things. Just looking at maps, bonuses, and the PDF were like kind of split up into four parts, which I thought was really cool. Instead of having if I were to print it out, I wouldn't have to print out a chunk. And I like having kind of like in the Beetle Grimm style. I like having just the chunks of things so that I can mess with that. As we play through it, it feels like I'm giving more focus to it than to a big old book. I like the big old book, but I also like having those chunks as well.
Right on. All right. Well, then, unless there's anything else, I'm going to go ahead and call this the end of the episode. So I want to thank Skull Splitter Dice for supporting us. I also want to thank all of our listeners who support the show by using our affiliate links to Amazon or DM's Guild, which you can get to at thetomeshow.com, or for supporting us directly as patrons at patreon.com/thetomeshow. I also want to thank our guests. Ishmael, thank you for being on once again. Tell us, where can we find Ishmael Alvarez?
I can be found primarily on Twitter under Elven Wizard King Lorathorn, whichever is easiest for you to spell. And I am on Drive Through RPG under my given name, Ismael Alvarez. But also, if you for Fat Goblin Games, I'll be doing a lot of edition stuff for them.
My favorite of which is your, I think I've told you before, is your the Aurora's Whole Realms catalogs that you've done, right?
Yes. I expect some more of those.
No, I pulled a whole list of potential furniture for my Dragon Heist game that they could populate into Troll Skull Manor, so it worked out really well. And Yeah.
I love hearing it.
And Jonathan, what about you? Where, if people want to reach out to you and ask you about how your running of the Demonplague is going, where can they go?
Yes, you can reach out to me on Twitter at John_M_Green, and hopefully about the time that this will come out, I should have a product releasing on DM's Guild. That's the one. For a short adventure called Fistful of Warforged. Yeah, give me some crazy westerns. That would fit well into Eberron. I look forward to seeing that. All right. If you want to get a hold of the show or me or anybody else, you can email thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter. I am at Squatch, SQUACH. You can go to @SarahDarkMagic on Twitter and talk to Tracy, even though she wasn't on this episode. You can reach the show. It is at The Tome Show. And I think that's it. This is episode 330, where we waded through the mud and tried really hard not to get sick. In this episode of The End. All right, let me stop.